we are following breaking reports of widespread. I just don't understand how anyone can think that.
Just hours before the U.S. government was set to shut down, the Senate passed a bill.
Wait a minute. We have some questions.
All right, so here we are. This is intended to be episode 1 of the Not the Authority podcast. I am Shendell. You know my name.
I'm Sarah.
I'm Sarah. And as I said, this is episode 1. So we just got through, hopefully, figuring out all of our fun little technical things. Our audience will get to come along with us on this learning curve, but we're just talking about how we want this to be as authentic as an experience of conversation as we can get, because everything is so curated in the world that we live in, and as neurodiverse females, we're kind of over it.
Yeah, and I will, as a disclaimer, say that I don't identify as a neurodiverse female, but a lot of other people identify me as a neurodiverse female. So that's how I identify.
I will not. I will not armchair you then.
No, you can't. It's fine. But yeah, for anybody who doesn't know me, I was working in engineering before this. I'm not exactly sure what I'm doing in the future, but yeah, all my favorite people there were just like, yeah, you're definitely autistic. And I'm like, I don't think I am, because I've never had like a problem with like emotions or empathy or anything, which I thought was a feature, and we might need to cut this out, of that diagnosis. But, I think there's an interesting conversation. See, I'm just going to get myself into trouble by saying my thoughts.
No, go for it.
I think there's an interesting conversation going on that maybe is not being connected, where a lot more people are identifying as neurodivergent. And I really think it's because that they're just, they feel like there's maybe a label that has to be placed on themselves in order to be an actual authentic person in the world, because our culture is so fucked up and makes people mask all the time. So at least for me personally, I don't really understand, where even in a diagnostic format, if there is such a real thing as neurodivergence, or if it's like a cultural, I think there is, but, I think it's on a sliding scale, and it's like who would fit in that category and how they diagnose people with that and stuff is confusing to me. So maybe we should speak to somebody about that someday who is more knowledgeable about it than I am. And, I don't mean to offend anybody, but it's just like, yeah, I fit in the neurodivergent category, but I don't identify with it necessarily. So I don't really, I don't know if there are other people out there like that.
Yeah, no, I'm sure that there are. And I think that especially in our culture over the last 5 or 6 years, we've really seen an influx of people who are finding some understanding of self through the diagnostic criteria and all of those the tools that come along with it. And I think that, as more research comes out and more of these conversations happen, the whole concept of the spectrum will probably evolve as well. So, and here we are. This is what Sarah and I do. We just talk, and one thing will lead to another. So there's likely to be a lot of rabbit holes in this discussion as things move forward. But what Not the Authority is about us having just genuine conversation with other people, bringing in real people to talk about the things that they think about, to talk about the things that they've learned and the things that they know that the rest of us might not have perspective into without being curious enough to ask questions. Our focus right now is on the systems that build our world, because those systems are in need of a lot of work. And I think everybody has their own perspective on what work is most important or how that work needs to be done. But very few of us have a day in, day out perspective on what that work is. And so we have some really exciting conversations with some really cool people ahead of us that we've got really coming in pretty quick on the calendar. And I think we're going to learn a lot about our place in society and the opportunities that we have to engage and to be a part of systemic change in a way that is more collaborative. Um, and so I'm really hoping that we can bring other people into that conversation with us. I know we always have a lot of fun just deep diving, and I think there's value to it.
Yeah, and I've been thinking about this, and I didn't say anything to you yet about it, but I think where we're starting with this podcast and where it's going to end up might be very different, because I think part of what we're trying to do is, really get to the root of how each and every one of us can become more effective at, creating change that we want in the world. Um, and we're focusing on systems, but those systems are evolving so rapidly, like right now, too, right? So it'll be interesting. There's some more, I think, traditional things that, technologies and areas of work that have existed that will continue to be important to continue to work on. There might be evolutions in that area, especially with technology. And,
Yeah.
how our government is functioning or not functioning at this moment. So we'll see how scrappy it gets.
Yeah.
I think this is going to try to encompass everybody who, has been a professional in something for a very long time, and also people who are new and are just like, well, why doesn't this exist? I'm just going to make it, and I'm going to do
Yeah.
something completely different. And so, hopefully everybody's inspired to kind of find their place. And, I'm sure we'll be talking to people from all across the board. Um, the first two guests that we have lined up, and he can't make it for a couple of months, but he's an expert in geothermal technology. And so we're really excited to hear from him about that. He was saying that, it's really great, and it's also not well known enough. So that's kind of
Yeah.
what we're looking to do, is kind of, spread the message about things that already exist that maybe a lot of people aren't utilizing, and come up with ways to, make them more popular. The other guest that we lined up is somebody from the city that I live in, who in 2024, we have our city council elections every 2 years. And he ran. And he's a younger man, and we have a very conservative city council and mayor with, I'll just say, a lot of corruption. And, he was trying to break in, and really his big goal, as I understand it, and we'll let him speak more on this, was that he wants a community center built on the side of town that is underinvested in. And we could get into that in that conversation. But I think a lot of people's cities operate this way, right? And he did not win the election. He's not running again, but I did reach out to him to have him on this podcast because he decided to invest in the community in other ways. And I actually don't know what he's been up to. So he's going to come and tell us about that, and maybe give us hope, and some visibility for the people that are out there every day, trying to create change, and they might have to find different ways to do it. And hopefully we can all learn about that together, because I know I personally feel powerless sometimes. Like, where's the best place to direct my energy? And I originally got invested in his race because I was thinking about running for city council, but then seeing what they were all up against, it's just like, wow, I really don't know, even getting elected, much less making the changes that you want, is so cumbersome throughout like the established political process. So,
Yeah.
there's a lot going on.
Yeah, I think that our first two, scheduled interviews kind of speak to a little bit of a range of what we're hoping to be able to provide everybody, right? So we have like the big brained people who will hopefully be able to like demystify these more like larger scale systemic issues for us, like sort of I'm going to try to use another word other than systemic, but like the utility grids and these sort of external factors that affect our every single day that most of us go without even thinking about. We just go to the faucet, we turn on the water, we just go to the wall, turn on the switch. But there is so much work that needs to be done along the line of those systems. And we don't think about them. And when we do, it's very easy to like immediately get overwhelmed because we don't know what kinds of questions to ask. And so bringing in people who've really worked in these things and, made those topics and the evolution of those things their passion projects will hopefully allow the rest of us to see that things can be complex without being complicated. But then also bringing in people who are grassworks doing community work, which is another thing that feels really complicated because people feel complicated to us. Anytime you're dealing with lots of components or lots of people, it just feels really cumbersome to like keep enough confidence to stay empowered in the conversation when you're thinking about where you can act. And Sarah and I have both worked in a number of different fields, and not to discredit any of the people that we've worked with along the way who have taught us what we have. But one of the things that we've really come away from that in is that like nobody really knows what they're doing, right? Like we're all just people living our first life, like, you know, digging through the mud, trying to figure out how to be people. And then we get attached to roles that are either given to us or that we've chosen to ourselves. And everybody really is faking it till they make it and making things up as they go. And on one hand, that's really concerning when you think about people in power making decisions from a place of their humanity and the limits of their own perspective. On another hand, I think it's a really positive thing for the rest of us to lean into so that we can understand the power that we can have in our own lives and to do good work for other people, to empower other people as well. So I'm really hoping that we can kind of find a balanced perspective between, you know, these experts that sometimes get pedestalized in our culture because they work on things that the rest of us don't really understand, and like our neighbors who are just doing cool stuff because they woke up with the motivation and the courage to do it.
Yeah, and I think, there are a lot of podcasts out there who have a lot of industry experts on, and they do just get, touted like their ideas are great and they're the solution because they're popular or, they have money or power. And I really specifically want to hear from people who are doing the work who don't necessarily have a vested interest in a certain narrative, or I want to invite people on who have a different perspective, that may not be getting out there, to also provide, just some counter information so that we can all like
Yeah.
make decisions better without being fed something. And the reason we called it Not the Authority is because, I think, there's a cultural moment right now that's shifting where people are kind of sick of hearing from experts a little bit because,
Yeah.
we're kind of seeing that a lot of them are kind of bullshit artists. I'll just say that.
Yeah.
And, I think that we need to be allowed to say that, like, just everybody that calls themselves an expert maybe not necessarily is. There's a lot of like moneyed interests and political interests behind a lot of experts. And, I want our conversation to stay at the heart of like truth. But everybody also has different perspectives. So there's a lot of nuance and room for all of that in there. But yeah, I feel like when we all go on social media now or whatever, we just kind of hear like the same argument parroted over and over again. And, I think a lot more people are becoming suspicious of that.
Yeah. I think that, we have a pretty good understanding of how algorithms work. You probably have a better understanding of that from a technical perspective than I do. But we end up in echo chambers. And I think that the best way to fight the divisive rhetoric that we are all constantly surrounded with is to just let people speak. We can hear somebody's opinion without having to let it sway our opinion or without having to force ours upon them. And I think that, the beautiful thing about being human is that we all have individual experiences and perspectives. And while, my particular perspective might not be very important to somebody with, who's working in something highly technical that I don't have any experience in, that doesn't mean to say that like a question that I might have might open up an avenue of thinking that might be valuable to something that they're doing in a process. And I think that as creative beings, we need more collaboration in our world because the solutions don't always come from somebody who knows the most in the room. They could ask a question or reveal something that nobody else in the room has thought about that provides the solution. And so I think just being willing to hold space and bring people together who have different perspectives and just presenting those to people is going to be really interesting for us. I know that we both are very opinionated in our own ways, and we're okay with standing in that. I will also say that like I'm super opinionated, but if somebody presents me with a strong argument, I'm open-minded enough to know when I need to shift my paradigm in the way that I'm looking at something. And so I'm really curious to see how this process is going to reshape the way that we see the world too. And already just in the research and looking for people to ask on, it's brought me a lot of hope to see that like the kind of work that people are doing in the world and the kind of innovation that's happening that doesn't make the headlines. And I'm really hoping that other people will enjoy that as much as we do as we're sharing it.
Yeah. I need to think about this for a second. I had a response and then I lost it. So you were saying that, okay, we were talking about changing perspectives. Oh, and the hope and the inspiration. Yeah.
Yeah.
So what I was going to say about that too is, as somebody who has worked in technical fields and really like been able to dig deep and understand what is kind of going on technologically. I have some experience in cybersecurity. So when that applies to every industry, our energy grids and all of that stuff. And if you dig really deep on that, I mean, it's to me pretty apparent that there are a lot of issues, right? And there are a lot of issues that people are glossing over and ignoring. And, I've worked on a lot of technical projects where, the main issues are collaboration and treating people with respect and also, keeping, an agenda that serves the project, without ego and a lot of those things. So I think we can fix all the systemic and technical stuff, but we need to learn how to actually work through problems together better and value different voices and people in the rooms. But yeah, adding on to that is like I do feel pretty hopeless about that. I think a lot of people feel pretty hopeless right now as we're seeing, checks and balances that we thought maybe would have been enacted like really not be. That was really shocking to me. And and that's really just because I was behind the curve. I mean, all of that information was there to see, but were we able to see it through the obscurity? Maybe not. And we're all at different levels of evolution throughout all of that. So yeah, we will continue to grow, but yeah, we have even just like, observed and reached out and spoken with just a handful of people who are like doing really cool things that, it really does give me hope. And I think there are a lot of people out there who just want to know like what can we do to make things better? And I think that just by hearing from all these different people, I think it might light something up in all of us about, wait, I could be useful in that area, or this will inspire me to do something like that in my neighborhood. And I'm really excited to make friends. Honestly, I think I'm really excited to meet some people who are thinking along, I think constructive lines. And that I think that'll change the way I feel about the world, which is one of the major reasons I want to do this.
Yeah, absolutely. Same. I think that like we can get really isolated when things get tense, and it's really easy to kind of zero in on our own purview and not see what's happening out in the world. And I was actually kind of surprised at like how easy it was to find that the people were doing good work once we started looking. It's like it wasn't anything that was coming up on like my, because we're using social media and other research methods to kind of find people. But as soon as you start looking, then it like trickles in, and it's like, it's like a waterfall of just like, okay, wow, like people are getting busy and doing things and doing things that, I think I've thought about for a really long time, like, oh, how would we find a solution to this? And so it's like, it's really cool that like the time has come to really like shine a spotlight on those things. And hopefully the people that are doing the work can really give us their insight on not only like how they're like organizing the work or project managing the things that they're doing, but also the interpersonal work that they're having to do in their communities, and then like their psychological, like their own personal lens in stepping up to the plate. So hopefully we can kind of see what people are willing to offer us in that, and that offers more support too. I'm really excited to see what we gain for listenership, and who decides that like they might have something that they want to bring to the table too. Hopefully, this really becomes a collaborative project, and we can bring as many other people into it as possible. Yeah, overall, I'm just really excited. It's also just like a cool opportunity to get to like hang out with you. We have a really long history of people who met in elementary school and have lots of funny stories about things that have happened along the way. But I'm really excited to be learning all of this alongside you, from just like the technical behind the scenes aspects of figuring out our mics and our cameras and the recording equipment and all that, into like really seeing how these things open us up, because I think it's going to be a process. I think it's going to do work within us, and I'm grateful that I have you as a partner in that. So
Yeah, and for a little bit of our background, we both grew up in New Mexico. People know where that state is now, I'm under the impression of, but about
good.
15 years ago, everybody would ask me if I came from a foreign country. So that's helpful. And also, Shadell lives in Colorado now, which has grown a lot over the
Yeah.
past 20 years. And, it does have attention on it that wasn't there before.
Yeah.
I live in Minnesota now, and so we don't get to see each other. And we are busy, so, I guess we just don't call each other. But this has been a lot of fun, at least to get us to spend more time together and work on a project, since I think we have a lot of similar ideas.
Yeah. Yeah. And, so I'm in Colorado. Sarah's in Minnesota now, but we've lived all over the country over different circumstances. And so I think that's another thing that outside of professional backgrounds, which we haven't really discussed yet, and I'm sure we'll get to that. But outside of that, I think we've both had the opportunity to live in a lot of different kinds of places and meet a lot of different kinds of people. And there's always an initial culture shock in that. But I think that what that has taught me about people is that stepping behind the line of my own understanding has always been worthwhile. And any sort of preconceived notions I might have had about a culture or people, being able to step behind my assumptions or my initial perspective on that has really opened me up to understanding the world in a way that I wouldn't have had if I hadn't traveled. So my family and I have lived coast to coast. We've lived in different demographic areas. We've lived out of a van. We've owned a couple of houses. We've lived rural. We've lived hyper urban. And so I think that just having experience in those different ways of life has really opened me up to the nuance of what it means to be human and what different people can offer the world. And so I know that you've had your own travels and your own experiences with different cultures, and you've expressed the same thing to me, that really it's always interesting to have a conversation with somebody who's never left where they've lived, because they may not understand things on a more global scale. They might not understand what it's like to be in a different place, but they really, really understand where they're from. And I think both of those mindsets have a really like powerful gift to offer collaborative conversation.
Yeah, I've had many people say to me in different places that I've lived, like, oh, well, this place is just like everywhere else. So why would you bother, going anywhere else? And I kind of am feeling like attitudes around that are changing a little bit with social media. I think, there are travel accounts and people from all over the world, and people can really kind of see from, like a personal perspective what it's like to be somewhere else. So I think a lot of that has helped to increase people's imaginations about, the differences between places. But my perspective on it has always been that everywhere I've lived, which was mostly in the western half of the United States, on the West Coast and in the Rockies, and a couple places in the Midwest. And I just went to Boston for the first time a couple of years ago. So I haven't spent a lot of time in the Northeast, but yeah, it also was like very different.
Yeah.
I think they're all different. And I think that people, have really ingrained like narratives like around where they live. And um, I'd love to see people be able to break out of that a little bit too. And, I would love us to live in a world where, diverse people and diverse perspectives and experiences are welcomed everywhere. And, I've always felt like I don't always fit in, and I fit in better in some places than others. But, like in the Midwest, especially, is challenging for me. I also lived in Boise, Idaho. I'm just going to call you guys out. But, one of the things that I've noticed in both those places is that people are really surprised that I'm not from there. And then they are confused about where to go from that. And they're just like, well, what are you doing here? And I think I moved to Minnesota for work. So I'll say work. And then they seem really disappointed, or they're just confused that people move around and have a variety of reasons to do so. And I'm not trying to be necessarily negative about it, but it's hard to connect, if you have an expansive perspective with somebody who's just like, I don't understand why you're just not, you didn't stay where you went to high school, and
Yeah.
you're, hanging out with your family, and what are you doing here? And you kind of don't really belong here, and it's, but like in LA, that's a challenging place for a lot of reasons, and it's changed a lot since I lived there about 15 years ago. But people were from a lot of places, so places that
Yeah.
have a lot of like transient populations, like, are a lot more friendly and welcoming to like making friends with people from different areas and different perspectives. So I found it easier to make friends there, and yeah, I don't know if that really is helpful to add to this conversation,
No,
but
I think so.
you know,
Yeah.
I've noticed that, but moving around has at least changed like how I see the world, and or at least the United States. I haven't even really been like outside of North America, but at least like it's a very large country, and thinking about how can we be respectful of people from different cultures, even if they're just different regions. How can we be inclusive and welcoming to people who are not necessarily from a certain area? And how can, I think a lot of people want to move around too, but they're really scared to leave their comfort zones. And, you
Yeah.
know, I would love to, for people to feel more comfortable having new experiences. And, maybe you try on a perspective and it doesn't last forever. And like, that's okay. You don't have to like
Yeah.
commit.
Yeah. I think there's a lot of value in that and trying on the perspectives. I think, one of the things about this conversation, specifically when it comes to geography, that's important is that we live in a massive country, right? And the things that we're going to be speaking to, we're going to be speaking to the United States because it's where we're from. It's what we know. But I think that there needs to be a recognition that like culture is very different in every single one of these states, and the systemic needs are very different in every single one of our states. Like you've got a lack of water resources and innovation needed for that for a lot of like the West and the Southwest. You've got completely different issues on the East Coast. And I think it's one of the things that our governments don't do a great job of acknowledging, that there are just some things we can't be on the same page with because people have different needs. And so I think that on the forefront of us having this intro conversation, I think it's important to like point out like that we can recognize that people have different needs, and there's different types of solutions that are going to be valid for Washington State than what might be valid for somebody or a community in Georgia. And hopefully we can bring people on with perspectives of those different places that can really give us a lens and a viewpoint into their world. I think too, when we're talking about the more overarching systems, like what really stemmed this idea for me was having the opportunity to take a homeschool field trip to a water treatment plant here in Colorado Springs, and the kids were kids about it, and they joked that it reminded them of the back rooms. It's just like really utilitarian and kind of creepy. But our poor tour guide, I probably asked him 50 plus questions about things that I didn't even know that I was going to be curious about, and it really opened my eyes to those processes and where even my community is making innovation that I didn't know that they were doing. And so hopefully we can get some more people on to kind of talk about the systems that are currently holding us up, who can give us some insight on the things that they're encountering. I know one of the questions I had for the gentleman who was our tour guide there that I don't know that he necessarily had an answer to was about the technological aspect of it. Everything's digitized, and I really had more questions about like the security of that, and I think that like that's a very, very valid concern and question to have, and I don't know that a lot of people who are working in these systems really understand how they're best supposed to support what ends up being national security and those things. So anyway, as we begin to really talk to people who are working in those systems, I think that we're going to find that there are different solutions for different places. And I think having a nuanced perspective of being able to sit back and say, like, what might work for one group of people is absolutely not going to work for another group of people. And they're going to require a different type of innovation. But we can still learn from the work that other people are doing, even if it doesn't necessarily apply to our own circumstances.
Yeah, and one of the cool things that we've noticed, Chantal has a little bit of experience in nonprofit, and I do not for the most part. Um, but we've learned that a lot of people who got these really great local projects off the ground, got funding through grants and things for them too. And so we'd really like to explore, how people can get alternative funding, and maybe how, mutual aid's a big conversation right now, but like how we can expand all of that. Like I'm interested in maybe micro investing and how we can deploy our resources in different ways to support people who have this expertise, but maybe no resources to create projects. Minnesota's great for that because up until recently, we've always had a budget surplus, and it's always been invested in like different, projects to like lift people up. Like there's a lot of agricultural grants and programs available. And that's just one example. I mean, it's a great place for, arts support. But yeah, I do think that the way that we're going to solve a lot of these problems will include a lot of local solutions. And, I think one of the big problems that we have right now is that a lot of our resources are all being siphoned out into like a handful of people, right? And corporations. And so in order to claw that back, we need to start distributing the money that we have and the expertise that we have amongst each other, and really supporting each other. And that's a huge cultural change for a country as large as the United States. And also there's an issue of censorship right now, as we were kind of discussing on, about the algorithms and social media, that, hopefully this platform will become a little bit more of like an independent media source, so that we don't necessarily have to rely on, digging through a meta algorithm to connect with people. And, I think one of my goals for this podcast is hopefully to start raising, money and support for people, our guests who come on the show and have projects that, they're trying to expand or get off the ground, and, just connect people so that we can all facilitate, a better world for each other and ourselves. And I think that starts with just thinking about it in a different way and realizing that there are opportunities, but I think a lot of us don't really know about a lot of them.
Yeah, I think that beyond, the conversation and what can be gained from the conversation, we do really want to provide people with tangible ways to make a change in their community. And so that's one of the things we have planned to build into our website is links to resources that our guests are able to give us for things that really helped them, and then to be able to connect people to the resources that they have to share amongst each other. So, it is just another podcast in some senses, but for us, we're really hoping that it becomes bigger than that it becomes something that has a ripple effect that can help us learn to be more engaged in our community and have a sense of empowerment that we can learn how to engage and be productive in helping things change, but to really invite everybody else along with us, to do the same in whatever their interest is, whatever their special skill set, or just the part of the garden that you can reach. Um, I'm really excited to see what we can build from that, and hope that along the way we'll gain some other people who want to help us build, um, and who will have their own vision and their own things to contribute to it. So yeah, I think a little while ago you said, um, that this is probably going to end up somewhere completely different than what we we anticipate, and I think it's going to be really cool to just like ride the waves and see where it flows. Yeah.
Yeah, full disclosure, Shandell and I are big fans of trusting the universe. So, we're really just counting on the right people to find us who connect with our message. And we're just trying to be as authentic as possible so that, we can find the right community. And I think maybe that's why people are having a hard time finding community, because I think we're trying to force it and we're trying to get like
Yeah.
people who maybe just aren't compatible together in a certain space to make a certain thing happen, but everybody has different goals, and there's a lot of conflict going on right now, but it's just like, yeah, I think if we leave space maybe, to find your people, then we're hoping, I think it's already happened. The couple of people that we already found either just and we've reached out to a couple more, but they just appeared right in front of my face, or they were somebody that I already had like a connection with. Um and we haven't had to like work really hard at that. And I think a lot of this has come together in a very organic way. So, as much as like I can't wait to have higher production value, I also like don't want branding to overtake, the message and what we really have to share, which is you know, I think for me personally, I just want an opportunity to say things and have a different perspective on things that maybe are unpopular to just put out on social media that will just cause an argument, right? Like it's a diplomatic type of platform where we can all be respectful of each other. And I'm definitely open to having people correct me too, because I'm not necessarily sure that my perspective is, it I think I probably said some offensive shit on here already. But, it's like I don't think that if we're all just pretending to be perfect, we're going to leave room for that kind of discourse also. So, I mean, I'm assuming that this will be harmonious, hopefully, but, we're also not really only looking for people who strictly agree with us, or maybe somebody
Yeah.
will be an expert in a certain area and have, maybe some viewpoints that we don't agree with. And we'll just, we want that to be acceptable. And I'm really hoping, for anybody, and I'm sure everyone's going to ignore this in the future, but, who wants to add like to the comment section on anything, I really want this to be a place of respect, and
Yeah.
openness. And if you can't handle hearing somebody else's perspective, then I would prefer that you leave instead of trying to fight. Or if you want to include your perspective, find a respectful way to do it. And
Mm.
I'm pretty serious about moderation. I have a hard time being on social media just because of all the fighting, right? And it's just like I want us to have tough conversations about areas where there are failures in our society, without blaming people constantly, right?
Yeah.
So I think that we need more spaces like that in general, and I think people just need help learning how to collaborate. And I think that certain, platforms have given a lot more, space to certain areas of the population, as we can see with like, the rise of the alt-right right now. It's just like
Mm.
that's, it's acceptable, for those people to have a platform of hate, in my opinion. And I think that a lot of people who try to have a productive conversation get shut down. And I've noticed this in work, and I think I'm trying to find a way so that we can increase equality in our society. And I know that so many people have so many good ideas that are not being taken seriously.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I think too, in alongside the concept of being able to like agree or to disagree respectfully. I'm really actually looking forward to bringing on some people who we don't have the same perspectives with, and I do want everybody else to know that we'll be doing that with intention, because that's something that we need to get comfortable with doing as a people. Like, there are some serious rhetorical divides that are being enforced algorithmically and through media bias. And we don't know how to have conversations with human beings anymore who see the world in completely different ways from us. And if we're going to change anything, we have to be willing to do that. And I'm not saying that we have to be able to compromise on our perspectives. We each have the perspective and the point of view that we do for a reason. But there's nothing wrong with having a conversation with somebody that you agree with and then leaving that conversation and being like, yeah, I get where they're coming from, but it's just not mine. And like, and I think knowing that from us, like, there's a high likelihood that if this goes where we want it to go and you listen long enough, you're going to experience that. You're gonna be like, why are they giving this person a platform, or why are they talking to this person when these aren't the ideals that we know they have, or these aren't my ideals. And so I definitely do want people to keep in mind that, like, we're doing that with intention and on purpose, not because we want to parade, this othered person, but to actually validate them as a human being that has a perspective that was formed by the life that they lived and what they encountered in it. Because we live in a society with other humans, and we need to be able to have those interpersonal skills. Do we have to have personal relationships with those people? No. Do we have to, yield in our own boundaries when we're dealing with those people? Absolutely not. But just having respect for people because they're people, I think it's really important. And I think it might be challenging depending on who we bring on and to fit that space, for us to navigate those disagreements. And I'm looking forward to, like, working through that and figuring out how we could model some ways for others to do that. And hopefully people will, like, chime in too and be like, hey, you had a moment there. Like, here's, yeah, I think it's going to be really interesting, but that is something that I think we want people to be aware of, that we're not just looking to uplift the people who are inspiring to us, but also the people who are doing work in whatever field they're doing it in, who may or may not be aligned with our perspective on how things should be going.
Yeah. And I think, I believe that one of the goals for all of us, just as far as being alive, is to grow as people. And Chanel and I have been friends for a very long time, and we've had our ups and downs. And I think we've both grown as people. And now is a really great time where I feel like we maybe have a more similar perspective than we've had in the past, or we've learned, like, ways to move past that. And that's just age. And, if you're learning as a person, like, hopefully, like, you get better. So yeah, we're not expecting perfection from anybody. And a example that I think of right now, as far as, maybe ways that, like, are is like a group of people that could be controversial to, like, potentially have on our podcast would be, like, I think that people in rural America, and I'm not from rural America necessarily, but New Mexico also was not a very developed place to live when I grew up there. So I feel like I have a little bit of a perspective that's neutral on that. But, a lot of the discourse over the past 10 years in our society has kind of been, excluding rural voices. And they have, I really have seen, over the past few years, especially, how they have a lot of boots on the ground knowledge about the systems that our entire country runs on. And, I'm really open to the fact that they felt incredibly disrespected, I think, by certain people in our society in the name of progress, which I think has led to more of a contentious situation that we are now in than it necessarily had to. So I'm not a Donald Trump supporter. I'm going to go out and say that right now. But if somebody who is a Donald Trump supporter comes on our show and they have some actual, like, factual expertise to share, like, I definitely am open to having them on as a guest, and so we can all learn and grow from that. And I really think we are at a place in our society where this needs to extend beyond political parties. I believe
Mm-hmm.
that, politicians across all sides of the aisle right now at this point are not being transparent about, how they're trying to help the American people. So I believe it is up to the American people to find a way to work together right now. And, I think we can learn and grow a lot from each other and give people space to be themselves as well. I don't think there's another way to do it at this point. Like, we
No,
cannot continue to outsource our power to people
no.
who promise one thing and deliver another, and we cannot alienate our neighbor. I know I live on a street that has half people with Trump signs in their yard and the other half are immigrants, and maybe there's a couple of, like, neoliberal, like, white people there, right? Mixed in. You know, and we don't talk about any of that. Like, we all basically just ignore each other, like,
Yeah.
we'll wave hi when you're mowing your lawn. And, for me, that's actually really sad. It's just like,
Yeah.
Derek's my husband. We talk a lot about how when he grew up, they had block parties a lot, where all the
Mm.
neighbors, like, they probably weren't, like, divided politically, but they were all neighbors in the same neighborhood, and they got together and the kids ran around and they shared food, and, they supported each other. And he's still friends with some people from his neighborhood. You know, we're kind of old now. We're, like, pushing 40. He's a little bit over 40. Yeah. So, we're also kind of speaking, I think, to the millennial, like, age group too.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I would love to see that again. I would love to see people get along and just agree to disagree on some things, but yeah, when it comes to hurting people or people being hurt, that's hard to move past. But
Mm-hmm.
also, um, yeah, I mean, it's really tough. I'm not sure that's, possible to get us to a utopia, but, we should
Yeah.
try, right? I think we can do a lot better than we're already doing. So
Yeah.
that's the
I mean,
goal there.
yeah, I think that, like, obviously perfection is not attainable, but I think that, progress is in the hands of the American people, as you said, like, um, I won't get too far into my own political disenfranchisement, but I'm really not interested in what anybody, at least high up in that system, has to say about anything anymore. I'm far more interested in what the American people are doing to make changes that directly impact them and their neighbors and their communities. And I think that um, we have power. And I'm certainly not interested in giving my power away to billionaires or corporations or any other authoritarian source at all. And so I guess I did get a little bit into my own political disenfranchisement, but that doesn't mean that I don't respect people who do have faith in our democracy still, and that do want to see change made there and are working towards that. I think that as much as the headlines would tell us that things are immovable and that the checks and balances haven't worked the way that they're supposed to do, I do have hope that there are people doing good work to maintain our democracy. And hopefully maybe we'll get to see some of that too. But yeah, I don't want political divisions to determine who gets a voice and who doesn't, because those things don't matter at the end of the day. Those aren't the people who you're mowing your lawn next to. When there's a bad storm and your neighbor's tree falls on your house, like that's you're not dealing with their political beliefs in that moment. You're dealing with the human being. And I have had the opportunity to live a little bit rural. As Sarah mentioned, where we grew up and when we grew up in New Mexico wasn't necessarily like the most urban, especially like budget-wise. New Mexico has always really struggled with resources and education. I do think we were really lucky with the education that we were given. We actually went to really good schools and had really great teachers. but a lot of that was due in part to the fact that our little town was funded by Intel. And so we really did have, I think, some of the best education that we could have had. And I'm lucky and grateful for that public education that we had. But I have had an opportunity to live rural for several years and to work in nonprofits work and to work in community building work in rural areas. And I will say that the rural people know how to get shit done. And they know how to get shit done together. They know how to gather resources. They know how to fill the gaps. And they know what their communities need. Just like anywhere else in the country, you have division and you have opposing perspectives that keep things from happening in small local government places. But a lot of the change that I saw in those rural environments was outside of the hands of city council, and it was small business owners and community builders who were making really big things happen in their communities, making sure that food banks were operating, making sure that there were third spaces that were safe and accounting for positive mental health change. And so I'm hoping that as we tell stories of people who are doing things in larger communities, we also get a chance to really talk to the rural change makers, because they know their shit.
Yeah. I'd love to share a little story quickly. So since I'm in the suburbs of Minneapolis, I think everybody has seen on the news that there have been a lot of standoffs between the population and police and any kind of law enforcement. It hasn't been great, right? But last winter, I was driving through rural Iowa and I got diverted off of the freeway into some county road, and a huge blizzard hit, and I was in a major car accident, right? I mean, I could have died very easily just because of the weather conditions. And the way that that small town pulled together and like helped people out of the car accidents, and like, the police, the ambulance drivers, they're all doing the Lord's work out there, like going out in a blizzard and pulling people off the side of the road. It was very dangerous for them. And all of the people at the hospital were wonderful. The police department found my briefcase on the side of the road and returned it to me. There was no Uber or anything out there. Everybody thought I was so funny. I'm like, how do I get a ride to like get a rental car? And they were just like, bah, ha, ha, good luck. But, shout out to, I think his name is Ben, this wonderful man who worked at the hospital, just gave me a ride 45 minutes, to the rental car place. And it really renewed my faith in humanity. And I'm not sure that those are people that, I would agree with politically, but, like they live in an area where there aren't a lot of like there's not a lot of infrastructure, and they actually have a really great system for like how people can help people, even strangers from the city, from out of town. I was very grateful, and that really opened my eyes to just like how things operate differently in places like that. I mean, the Midwest is really scary with some of the severe weather we get, and people really do come together. And it is a direct contrast to how things have been operating in the city, in the larger city that I live in. And it makes me think that, there's things to learn from both sides. I don't think that things have to be as contentious as they are. Here, there's a lot going on that, we'll probably get into at some point, but I don't know, it changed my perspective. Just seeing how other people live, I think really that's what it is. And I think that if we hear other people's stories, that always helps me find my humanity when I lose my patience, which is often.
No, I feel that. Yeah. And I think that speaks to like the heart of America. And what I hope we can plug into is the way that people come together in unexpected ways. I think that's always been what it means to like be American. Just to, as much as I'm disenfranchised by the political system, I am very patriotic. I really do believe in the American people. And I'm really excited to see what they show us.
Yeah, I don't think I have anything to add. We're coming up on an hour now. We should probably wrap it up. If anybody listens to this, thank you. And you just walked into some random rabbit hole that, you're welcome to come back for the next episode and see what happens.
Yeah. Thanks for joining us. please continue to join us. If you have any suggestions for anybody you want us to talk to, or if you want to come talk to us, hit us up. Our website is www.nottheauthoritypodcast.com. We've got contact forms on there. You should be able to find us pretty much everywhere on social media. We're going to work on really getting that rolling for everybody. So I guess we'll see you out there, and hope you stay curious with us.